Hey Sam. Hi. I'm a relatively new DM about to run my second campaign and I'm a bit apprehensive about it. A few months ago, I ran a modified version of The Wild Beyond the Witchlight for a group of my friends on a Discord server. Initially, things were going well. Everyone was having a great time. Toward the end of the campaign, my players decided to have a big cinematic showdown with the Jabberwocky in the Palace of Heart's Desire. It was a challenging fight and everyone worked hard to bring the beast down. Well, almost everyone. One player, we'll call him Kevin, managed to roll well enough to be at the top of the initiative order. At the beginning of the fight, he cast a rope trick, climbed into the space, and pulled the rope in after him. Kevin then stayed in the box until the Jabberwocky had been defeated. He made absolutely no contribution to the fight, repeatedly holding his action to attack if the creature came within 5 feet. We were playing with milestone-based leveling. At the end of the fight, he immediately asked if he was going up 1 level, or more since it was such a tough opponent, as well as what loot he would be getting. The other players were outraged by his question, saying it was BS, and that if he got his way, they would quit the campaign. I tried to explain to Kevin that he hadn't done anything in that interaction that would have caused his character to grow as a person, and that leveling up wouldn't make sense in this scenario. But he also got angry, stating that the campaign was almost over and it didn't matter overall. He went on to say that if he didn't get to level up with the group, he would be quitting the campaign. I let Kevin know that the final call was that he would not be leveling up in this session. I explained to the group that I don't appreciate ultimatums and told them if they would like to have that kind of control over the game, they are more than welcome to try DMing. I'm certain this is where I messed up. After this conversation, interest in the game dwindled and no one showed up for the session. The campaign ultimately ended up getting canned. Now, almost 5 months later, the group is excited about the game again and ready to start a new adventure. I prefer being a player, but I am one of only 2 people in my server that are willing to host games. The other DM of the group has been out for a couple months, dealing with personal issues, and I'm eager to play again. I agreed to run the next campaign, but I have a few concerns. How could I have handled the last campaign better? And how do I tell my players no without it killing the vibe? Edit. Kevin has confirmed that he wants to join the upcoming campaign. Okay, let's get the easy stuff out of the way first. How do I tell my players no without killing the vibe? The best way to do this is to come from a place of understanding. Make sure that you know where your players are coming from and what they want when you tell them no about something. And if you can, try to compromise. Don't just flat out say no. You could say no, but, and then, work together, because this is a cooperative experience. Even if you are the DM, it's a cooperative experience. And the best way to anger your players and to start an argument or to kill the vibe is to say no without understanding where they're coming from. This is the best way to start an argument, is to not listen to what the other person is saying to you. That's argument creating 101, is to not listen to what the other person is saying. So make sure you understand what they want, where they're coming from, and then when you have that information, make sure it's properly communicated. You can tell them no without killing the vibe, and you can provide them with your reasoning if it helps. Now, of course, this isn't always going to work. Sometimes it's just impossible to get through to another person. Maybe you're not explaining well enough, maybe they're not understanding well enough, or vice versa, and there's just no connections being made. And in that case, there's really nothing that you can do. You can't get through to them, or they can't get through to you. There's nothing to be done there. Okay, now on to the hard question. How could I have handled the last campaign better? This one is tricky. The first thing that stood out to me when I read this was that you were using milestone-based, and that Kevin wasn't going to be able to level up at the end of the session, but everyone else was. I don't agree with this decision, because that is a punishment that is going to carry over. Although this campaign is brief, it's still a punishment that's going to carry over for everyone. That doesn't just punish Kevin, that punishes you as the DM, because now you have to work harder to balance encounters, knowing that one party member is a lower level than the rest of the party. That punishes the party because their effectiveness is now weaker due to one party member being a lower level. And obviously that punishes Kevin because now he has to watch everybody else get their next level, feat or class feature, and he's still stuck behind. And that's always going to be the case, This issue is strongest in the earlier campaign. Like, could you imagine just being the lowest level for the rest of the campaign? And I'm explaining this as if the campaign was going to go on forever, because the longer that player is one level down, the worse that punishment is. Could you imagine going years of being one lower level? And if at any point you ever catch Kevin up, that would be a punishment to the other players because they're missing out on that level. Unless you say something like, oh, it's been a month, it's been 2 months. You've learned your lesson. Here's the level back. I guess that fits, but I don't necessarily agree with it because for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. What isn't in this post that I kind of wish was, and the disadvantage of doing these DM hotlines on Reddit is that we can't have a back and forth, or I can't have a back and forth with the DM. So I just have to work with the information that's given to me. And what isn't here right now is why this player didn't participate in the combat. I can't imagine what reasoning Kevin had for stowing himself away in an extra dimensional space while the rest of the party participated in the combat. The big signal to me, if a player does that, is that combat wasn't very fun. If a player is actively avoiding a situation, then that situation obviously doesn't appeal to them. They don't want to be a part of it. And this is something that I kind of wish would have been brought up in the post, because I think the reasoning for Kevin not being a part of the combat is important. If it was something along the lines of like, my wife needed me to help out with something and I had to step away, so I'm going to put myself in an extra dimensional space. I mean, that's understandable. Or maybe one of the kids is trying to cook and they set the house on fire. I got to go deal with that. So put me in this extra dimensional space while I step away. That would be my assumption if I was the DM in this campaign and the player was just like, I'm not going to participate in this combat. I'm just going to step away. My first assumption wouldn't be so negative as to they're just trying to game the system or pull one over. Like if the combat, I have to assume without the players telling me that the combat is fun and that they want to be a part of it, that they're actively going to be engaged in it. So if one of them has to step away, I'm assuming that they do so not because they want to, but because maybe they have to. So that's really where it comes down to, is you need to understand why they stepped away from that combat. If it's a good reason, then you don't have to worry about it. You did say that this campaign has been going on for a while. Everything was going well and everyone was having a great time. That's why if this is an anomaly, then that leads me even more to believe that something may have come up in real life that the player had to step away. It could be anything. Parents needed something from them. They got to do the dishes, take out the trash, whatever. Something probably came up where they had to step away. The alternative is they didn't want to participate in that combat because it wasn't fun. Either way, you have to take responsibility, because I'm talking to you and not Kevin. Either way, you have to take responsibility for that, or for that situation in the game itself. You have to look at it and go, was this fight fun? Were they having fun with it? And did something come up that maybe they couldn't participate? That's really on you. And I'm not saying it's your fault. It's just, you're the one that I'm talking to, or, OP's the one that I'm talking to. I can't talk to Kevin. If I was talking to Kevin, I would say, hey, why weren't you in this? And try to get that out of him, The next thing that I want to address as far as how you handled that campaign is reward versus punishment. It's generally better, at least the way that I run, to reward good behavior rather than punish bad behavior, because we're all here to have fun. We're here, we're playing a game. So when you actively seek to punish a player, that's generally worse than rewarding good behavior. And a great way to handle it for this fight in particular is to reward the players. If you decide that you want to punish Kevin, I think the best way to go about it would just be reward the good behavior that the other players participated in. If you consider that good behavior, and Kevin stepping out of the fight, leaving his party to fend for themselves, if you can reward, rather than punish Kevin, reward the other members for participating in that combat. And Kevin will look at that and go, hey, why didn't I get anything? And you could, explain like, oh, well, you weren't a part of that combat. That was the players' combat. They did this. They attacked the Jabberwocky. They participated. They get this reward. So that's kind of a way, like, reward good behavior. Don't punish bad behavior. All right. And the last thing I want to talk about is this paragraph here. I tried to explain to Kevin he hadn't done anything in that interaction that would have caused his character to grow as a person, level up. Remember, leveling up punishes the entire party, not just Kevin, and it punishes you as well, because you have to balance encounters differently now. Didn't get a level. He'd be quitting the campaign. I agree with you about this ultimatum. If a player were to tell me, I'm going to quit the game unless you do this, that is trying to hold your game hostage. Do not tolerate that. You're out. If anybody was to say that to me, if you don't do this, I'm quitting, you're gone. If the players to collectively say that, the difference is if the players, all of the players are in agreement about something that they want from you, I think that at that point you should budge, because the game is as much about, it's a cooperative experience. Everybody has to work together. If one person is trying to hold your game hostage, that's different than the entire party saying, hey, I don't think this should be the way it goes. If it's 4v1, you kind of have to just give it to the majority. And right here, you actually learned what happens when you don't. I'm certain this is where I messed up. After this conversation, interest in the game dwindled and no one showed up to the sessions. The campaign ultimately ended up getting canned. So you learned that lesson. If you strong arm your players, or if you try to force your fun onto the players, they're going to rebel. Like, they want to have their fun as well. And I agree, depending on how they handle it. If they give you an ultimatum, if all the players say, we want this, it's tricky. I would need a little bit more information. But generally, when all of my players are in agreement about something that they want, I follow through, regardless of whether I agree with it or not. I appreciate the fact that I appreciate when players are so cohesive and cooperative that I'm willing to budge on a lot of things as long as all of the players are working together, because that's the best thing that could happen for a DM in a D&D game in general, is everybody's working together. That's the best. I don't want to be just like how Kevin was the one that was like, I should get loot. I, as a DM, don't want to be the one that says, I don't want this, and then the player's like, but we want this. So, majority rules. Not a lot of people may agree with that. That's okay. You mentioned loot in here. You mentioned that the players would be outraged, or the players were outraged by him wanting loot. I kind of agree with this. As I mentioned earlier, rewarding good behavior and punishing bad behavior. Loot would be a reward for a combat that you participated in. If Kevin didn't participate in the combat, loot may be an option, but again, this depends on his reason. If Kevin tells you, I just didn't want to be in the combat, or they didn't get, I'll say this, if Kevin gives you a reason that you don't agree with, then him not getting loot is fine. As a DM, I don't really manage where the loot goes. I just make sure that the party knows about the loot. I don't like when players start stealing from each other without them knowing it. I want to make sure that everyone is aware and everybody kind of distributes loot evenly, and that people get what they want. And you can always fix this. You can always give more loot. You can always give more loot. Loot should never be an issue. Loot should never be an argument, because that is something that the DM can fix. But I do not distribute loot as a DM. As a matter of fact, if I put certain loot in the game and the players are unsure who should get it, I will usually tell them, hey, this sword, I put this sword here for the fighter. The rogue's got something coming up later this session, or maybe in the next session. I'll usually do things like that, because I generally decide loot on a player basis. I'll usually tell them out of character. If it's very rare for something to come up like that, because I'll generally design my loot in a way where there's no question about who this belongs to. But sometimes you get those loot, kind of like the Pearl of Power would be an example of loot. It's like, who do we give this to? We give it to the cleric or the wizard? Generally, I'll say, I'll theme the item, or I'll just tell them flat out, hey, this is for the cleric, or this is for the wizard, or this is for the cleric and the wizard's got something coming up later. That's, or they'll figure it out later when the wizard loot comes up. Maybe they'll exchange it, or I'll tell them then. Just communicate that one. Loot, I generally let the players deal with. I don't think Kevin should get loot, but again, it's gonna depend on his reason. If some real world stuff showed up, if his parents pulled him away from his computer to do some chores and he had to step away, and he told you like, hey, I'm gonna be in this extra dimensional space for this fight, but he didn't tell you why. So that's something that the big thing here is decide whether you want to reward or punish, and decide whether Kevin's reason was good enough. That's really what it comes down to. I don't think you did anything terrible. I mean, they want to come back, right? I agreed to run the next campaign, but I have some few a few concerns. 5 months later, the group's excited. You said everything was going well up to this point. I think this was just a one-time thing that went wrong. I wouldn't think too hard about it. It did kill the campaign, which is unfortunate, but you know, learn from this experience. I hope this helped. And that's it. That's all I've got for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, you know how YouTube works. Hit those buttons, leave a comment down below. If you need help with DMing, let me know. r/SteelySam. You can make a post. I also live stream on Saturdays at 4 p.m. Central Time. So welcome to anybody, open to the public. Pop in the Discord during a DM hotline. Join the waiting room, and I'll join the queue, and I'll pull you in. We can have a discussion about whatever you want. All the links to my socials are in the description. Come by, ask questions, let me know what you think. And as always, I'll see you at sundown.